Carbs are just this crazy thing that has become demonized. And what we need to understand that as our bodies are starting to change, that our strategies need to change. So I just want to talk a little bit about carbohydrates and also touch a little bit on insulin resistance, but know that you can enjoy carbs, still lose weight, and then I'll give you some strategies on how to utilize carbohydrates. So, first things first, I always talk about macros, right? So, we know macronutrients are protein, carbohydrates, and fat. If you think about a car, I'll relate all three of those things to cars and their parts. Cars, exterior, all the metal parts, the seats, that would be like your protein. That's your building block. Your fat is related to all of the fluids that are running through your oil, your transmission fluid, those types of things. And then your carbohydrates are really like your fuel. So if you are driving from Pennsylvania or from Royersford to Philadelphia, you're going to need maybe a quarter of a tank. If you're driving from Royersford to Ohio, you're definitely going to need a little bit more. And so on, the further you go out, the more fuel you're going to need. So it's really your immediate source of energy for the most part. Any questions on carbohydrates in that regard? Also, just so you know, carbs and protein for every 1 gram equate to 4 calories. For every 1 gram of fat, that equates to 9 calories. Okay, so as I said, carbohydrates is your main source of fuel. Our brains need carbohydrates, as do our muscles. When we severely restrict carbohydrates, what that can lead to, especially in the very beginning of that cut, is mood swings. We tend to have cravings. That leads to binging. And most often, why most diets put you in a very, very low carbohydrate situation is because you're going to see immediate results, but it's not from losing fat. It's more so from losing water. For every gram of carbohydrate you consume, that will equate to a certain amount of water. What we really need when it comes to carbohydrates is how to learn about blood sugar balance, how to help maintain muscle, and then how do we sustainably create a nutrition plan that does include carbohydrates that isn't going to impact us, especially at this stage in the game. So, what we're going to talk about in addition is the Carb Smart Method, choosing quality carbs, thinking about nutrient dense carbs versus calorie dense carbs. You may have heard me mention something called PFF. PFF stands for protein, fiber, and fat. So, majority of the time, unless you need that fuel immediately, like when I'm on a bike ride and I'm doing 50 miles, like I'm going to eat a banana by itself because I need that fast fuel. Other times, though, you want to consider having your carbohydrates with protein, fiber, and fat. That's the PFF. So we'll talk a little bit more in depth about that as well. And then timing of eating them and your portion sizes. And then we're just going to talk slightly about the mindset shift and touch on the all or nothing attitude, I would call it. So, step one, choosing quality carbs. So, what does that mean? Majority of the time, you're going to want to choose carbohydrates that are high in fiber, that are nutrient rich, and they're minimally processed. So, they're in the form that they come in. Things haven't been done to process them or modify them from their original form, shape, smell, size, etc. The reason we want that is because They're going to be more real foods. You're going to have fewer blood sugar spikes and obviously less inflammation because majority of the time they're going to be coming from a source that hasn't been manipulated with added sugars and other processing types of situations. They're going to be nutrient dense again versus empty calories or calorie dense types of foods, things that are going to give you the vitamins, minerals, and also antioxidants that our bodies need and really thrive on. And then when it comes to fiber, something, especially as we're aging, becomes more important because our cholesterol can change with our shift in estrogen. We do know that cholesterol, some cholesterol is good and we need that. But also, we want to make sure that we are taking at least 25 grams of fiber in per day, which is going to help slow your digestion down. It's definitely helping to balance your blood sugar, and it's also going to help you feel more satisfied for longer. So, true or false, white bread spikes blood sugar, but sourdough or Ezekiel bread is a different story. What would you say, true or false? You can take yourself off mute and just shout it. Anybody? No one? Okay. It's actually true. So, what does that mean? White bread is very fast digesting. It has a very low fiber content. It is a highly processed carb, and it does cause a quick spike in blood sugar. So I am sure everyone on this call, if you are in your late 40s on up, we used to have Wonder Bread all the time, or whatever store brand bought white bread was in our household, right? So the other thing that has changed through the years that is different than when we were kids is the way they process things, what they're doing to our wheat sources, where you may not have had that same response as a kid for your estrogen reasons or hormone reasons. You also probably didn't have that response because of the way the bread was made back then versus the way it's made now. So when we look at sourdough or Ezekiel bread, sourdough has been fermented. It has a lower glycemic index. So especially when you become insulin resistant, and I'll talk about that in a little bit, you want to make sure that you are having more carbohydrates that are on that lower glycemic index versus a higher glycemic index. And if anybody is interested in learning more about that, I already did another call on that. So just let me know and I can send you the replay. But because of that, it's going to have a less of an impact on your blood sugar. And it's also going to be easier to digest. Ezekiel bread or any kind of sprouted bread would also work, not necessarily just the Ezekiel, but has more fiber and protein. So remember the PFF, right? Slower digestion rate. It's definitely going to be less of an inflammatory type of food to give you less of an inflammatory response. And it's for sure more nutrient dense than even regular whole wheat bread. So if you're out shopping, you might want to try one of those two breads. And really the digestion difference, the difference between the breads is really about the digestion speed, the fiber content, and how much that particular bread is going to spike your blood sugar. Hopefully that makes sense. If it doesn't, just let me know. Next question, yes or no? If it grew in the ground or comes from a plant and hasn't been beat up in a factory, it's probably a smart carb. What would you think? Anybody?
True.
True. Very good. Thank you, Kim. So what makes a carb smart? Again, I mentioned it before. It's whole and minimally processed. It grew in nature. So think sweet potatoes, fruits, berries, oats, beans, stuff like that. They look like what they started as. and they have fiber, nutrients, and a structure that is going to take longer to digest. Not so smart carbs are going to be those that are ultra processed. So they've been packaged and for sure stripped of their nutrients. So think cereal bars, pastries, chips. I'm giggling because I used to buy my kids Pop-Tarts all the time. It was one of their favorite foods. Thinking back to how I fed my children, I'm like, oh, wish I knew now then what I know now. But they're full of added sugars, oils, and chemicals, and they do cause that fast spike in blood sugar, can cause cravings and also inflammation. So what does that mean? Again, if it came from the ground and hasn't been pulverized, dyed, sugared up, or deep fried, you're probably in a safe territory. And again, it's not about never eating those types of foods, but just like I talk about alcohol and its impact on our bodies, it's really about understanding how they impact you, impact your hormones, your hunger, your energy levels differently than whole food sources or whole food carbohydrates do. And then just minimizing your exposure and frequency of consumption. It's next to impossible to not enjoy those types of foods on occasion. But if the majority of the time you're eating more nutrient dense versus calorie dense, and you're really thinking, okay, am I eating this food because I enjoy it and it tastes good, or am I eating this food because it's setting my body up for success in long-term health? And it's not even always about weight loss, right? Thinking about long-term health is really the focus that is super important to us at this stage in the game, right? We're thinking longevity. So just to touch a little bit on insulin resistance. So insulin's a hormone. It's made by your pancreas. And what happens is as we're getting older, our body just doesn't process sugar like it used to. And it can actually cause our body to produce excess insulin, which isn't necessarily a good thing for our bodies. So the more carbs that are highly concentrated in sugar can cause our blood sugar to rise over and above what we truly want to see happening. There are things called continuous glucose monitors. If you want to get crazy and see where your blood sugar is, you can wear one of those and just check. Or you can go to the doctor and have your A1C checked, and they can tell you where you are and what your blood sugars are, and if you should be worried about prediabetes. But I will tell you that as we are aging and we are losing estrogen, that more and more women can become pre-diabetic, and their tests might show that. And there are simple strategies to reverse that, one of which is really focusing on higher nutrient dense foods, starting to exercise, et cetera, et cetera. But I digress. Eventually, what that can lead to is higher blood sugar in general, weight gain, particularly visceral fat, and cravings and crashes. And then again, an increased risk of type 2 diabetes. So what are some symptoms of insulin resistance? You're always tired, especially after eating. You're hungry again soon after meals. You crave carbs and sugar like crazy. You store fat in your belly no matter how clean you eat. You feel like you've tried everything. Weight won't budge. Doctors like, everything's fine, everything's normal, but you know something is not. I think that happens more often than doctors would like to admit as well. So why does it hit harder now? I mentioned earlier about less estrogen, right? So the more our hormones are changing, our estrogen levels are dropping, it does tend to, or I should say, it can tend to make our bodies more insulin resistant. And also because we are aging, we're also losing muscle mass at a rate just due to sheer aging, right? So that's important for maintaining a decent metabolism and making sure that we're not losing muscle at a more rapid rate. And then obviously, thinking about it right now, what's going on in my life? My mom has to be moved again. Some of us have kids in college. Some of us are experiencing job losses or career changes. They call them the golden years, but as my dad always said, they're really tarnished. So more stress, sometimes less sleep, and that's going to increase your levels of cortisol, which is also going to hamper your blood sugar control. Step 2, PFF, the protein, fiber, and fat. Why is that important? Slows digestion. Protein in particular helps with muscle repair. Protein, fiber, and fat help with satiety. Obviously, protein is going to support your lean muscle mass and should help boost your metabolism. So what would be some examples of protein, fiber, and fat with carbohydrates? It would be oatmeal plus Greek yogurt plus berries, rice, grilled salmon, avocado, whole grain toast, eggs, spinach, sweet potato, shredded chicken, olive oil, lentils, quinoa, feta cheese, and herbs. So just some easy examples to throw out there so that you can achieve that PFF. Step 3, talk about timing of carbohydrates and also portion sizes. We definitely don't have to give up carbs. In my opinion, carbs are necessary. The kind of carbs matter. And also, if you time them smarter and you portion all of your food with purpose. If you think back to what I said about macronutrients, your protein, fiber, and fat, we're going to talk about building the perfect plate. As far as timing is concerned, morning is a great time for carbohydrates. Your body is more insulin sensitive and you're more ready to burn fuel. So who knows? Maybe that's why the more carb type breakfasts or more carb type meals are found at breakfast. So again, your cortisol and all of your hormones are probably more inclined to accept carbohydrates more so in the morning than later on throughout the day. We mentioned carbohydrates are good for energy, right? So obviously then when do we need energy? When we're going to work out. So having carbohydrates, and I always say rule of thumb, 90 minutes before, during, after your workout is going to help with energy and also help replenish your glycogen, which is basically your carbohydrates within your muscle, which helps support recovery. And then dinner, yep, still okay, as long as it's not like a carb bomb, so to speak. So again, balancing with protein, fiber, and fat, you're okay with dinner time carbs. And actually, for some people that have trouble going to sleep, sometimes I'll recommend that they have a meal that is small, right? Probably 200, 250 calories. That is 75% carbohydrates and the rest protein and fat, because it can help you go to sleep. If you have too much, however, or you're sensitive, you could experience waking up at anywhere between 2 and 3 hours because your blood sugar is crashing and your body is wanting more sugar to get yourself back to sleep. So how do we build a great plate? I'm always an advocate when you are in a fat loss phase, the best way to get to your result the fastest is to make sure that you're measuring. But if you're not into that and you just want to try using your hand, as far as portions and macronutrients are concerned, you want to think about a cup of your hand, like a cupped hand. That would be your carbohydrate portion. This is great for when you're eating out too, or if you're dishing out your plate so that you can learn this. A minimum of 1 palm of protein, 2 fists of veggies, and then a thumb of some kind of healthy fat like olive oil, nuts, or avocado. Questions on that? Make sense? All right, so warning, skipping meals may then later cause you to binge. And most often, when we're starving and we feel like eating our fists, we're going to crave carbs. One, because they're super easy. Two, it's just our body's nature to want to crave those types of food. And again, most of the time, they're easier access. So skipping meals, you might think is great because you're cutting down on calories, but you're much better off as far as your blood sugar is concerned as well, spreading your calories throughout the day to help your blood sugar. And then naked carbs. So even snacking on just an apple by itself or just a banana by itself, you're better off doing a little bit of banana with some peanut butter or almond butter, some kind of fat, or if you're having some sort of snack with hummus, have that with some vegetables, even crackers, having some hummus with that. At least you're going to get a little bit of protein or cheese. We want to minimize the cheese. If you can just have a little bit with your crackers, you're going to be better off than having that alone. Does everybody get that? All right. So mindset shift. Being real, most of us aren't struggling because we don't know what carbs are, right? We are bombarded, and the media is coming at us about carbs and how bad they are, and we shouldn't eat them. I remember when I first started working with my nutrition coach, and I was looking at the list of low inflammatory foods, and I'm like, wait, I can eat white rice. I've been avoiding white rice and potatoes for 15 years. I can eat those things. And he totally didn't understand. First of all, he's not American. So all of his food is different than our food. And I was like, wow, I just have to worry about how much I'm having. It's not like I can never have rice or potatoes again. So that was a big eye-opening moment for myself. And I want you guys to understand that too, because it was crazy. I'm like, oh, I can't eat bananas. I can't eat apples. It was insane. So truly, we're struggling because A, we really don't understand what our food is made of because we've never really tracked it before. We've never been educated. I don't know about you, but I think I learned about nutrition when I was in eighth grade. I had no interest in that then. And then we get ourselves into this space where we feel like guilty for eating carbs or we can't have this. So we're restricting. And then you go on this binger, and then the next day, it's guilt. So, learning how to work these types of food in is really important. And that's also why I love a macro based nutrition plan, because then you're creating that balance and you can eat the foods that you like. So, does this sound familiar to you guys? I was good all week, so I deserved the binge. I ruined it with one slice of pizza, so I may as well eat the rest of the pie or have two or three more pieces. Carbs make me fat, so I just won't eat at all today. I'm sure we've all said one or more of those things throughout our lives. For me, it started in my 20s. So, where does the shift happen? Instead, think about your food as fuel to nourish your body and start to educate yourself on what your food is comprised of and what your perfect balance looks like the most of the time, most often. Understand that yes, you can have carbs, you just make them work with your body. So again, the timing, the PFF, the portion sizes, and then understanding perfection is not required. You're never going to be perfect. Consistency in the long term is what's really going to help you reach your goals, and it's going to help you be your healthiest. So just to recap, carbs aren't the enemy. They are a tool. We need them. You just need the right strategy. And the Carb Smart method is pretty simple. Think about quality majority of the time, pair it right with your protein, fiber, and fat, time it smarter in and around your workout time, more so in the morning or the beginning of the day. So you have that time for your body to utilize it. and ditching the all or nothing mindset. So that's all I have. Do you guys have any questions for me? Does it make sense?
This is Joanne. It's funny, some of the things that you said really resonated. A lot of it really resonated. But then when I like have started this journey and I think about things like fruit, like I never thought about fruit as a carb, right? It's just like fruit's good for me. And so like thinking about that and like how I paired the fruit with something else, that's definitely a big just mindset shift for me personally.
For sure. Great.
So
I'm
not a
glad.
question, but just a observation.
Yeah. And not that, like I said, I will go out on a really long bike ride, and I know after 90 minutes that my body needs pure sugar, pure energy. So I'm taking with me a banana, I'm taking clementines, and I can have that by itself. And then later on in the ride, I'm making sure that I not only have the carbohydrates, but I'm also getting a little bit of protein and a little bit of fat. So I don't know if anybody on here does crazy things like I do. After a couple hours, I need like a peanut butter and banana sandwich. And I get decent bread. Sometimes I have sourdough. Sometimes I'll do the Dave's Killer. And I put some peanut butter on it, and I have banana in there. And that helps me with my energy levels. And then I know, okay, I'm not just having pure carbs at this point, because after that extended amount of time, I do need other nutrients. So it's really looking at, okay, how much energy am I really expending? And how can I best utilize the carbohydrates that I am feeding myself? And really just taking like maybe a week, even if you don't want to track forever, take 4 days a week and track your food, and then look, what is my food that I eat the majority of the time? What is it comprised of? It can be very eye-opening if you've never done it before. I had a client say to me the other day, wait, so you mean if I have 100 grams of chicken, that doesn't mean that I'm getting 100 grams of protein? I'm like, no, just because it weighs X amount doesn't mean that it's a one for one situation. So it always pays to be more informed about what you're putting into your body. I had a client, she was my fitness instructor back when I was 21, 22, first graduated college, and I was going to ballets in King of Prussia. And she came to me a couple of years ago, and she's like, I cannot lose this weight. It's driving me crazy. And I looked at her activity level, and she was doing keto at the time. And I'm like, you can't do this. Your body is in a revolt right now, because with all the cardio she was doing, the number one source that you need for cardiovascular activity is carbohydrates. Not saying you don't need the others, but that is something that can really put your body in a state of, over time, low energy. So we made some changes, and she started eating more carbohydrates. And guess what? She was also less stressed and happier, because having those carbohydrates just makes you feel better. Hence the mood strings when you really cut them out. And sure, there's a time and a place to go low carb. If you're trying to lose weight and you're over the age of 40 and perimenopausal, and you do have insulin resistance, you may need to go into more of a lower carbohydrate scenario, but not a never have any carbs scenario. So fruits and vegetables are primarily a carbohydrate source, plus the loads of vitamins and minerals and antioxidants that come from them. So if you're not having those things, that's definitely not good for your body. So just understanding how active am I going to be for how long, and what is the balance of macronutrients that's going to best support my body, I think is really key. And everybody's different when it comes to that. So, any other questions?
Hi, this is Carrie.
Hi, Carrie.
Do you have, this was all great stuff. Some of it, it refreshed my memory. Other things were, I learned. But do you have other, it might not be the time or the place for this, but other recordings about like more on that? I have every one of those symptoms of insulin resistance. So do you have other recordings on that and like maybe how to break that? And
I definitely did a whole training on insulin resistance, and I'm sure I uploaded it on YouTube.
okay.
I will let me get your contact information
Hmm.
and I will forward that. Sorry, my dog's stop. Here, I'm gonna stop.